A thread of history. Tea house poems to nurture the past and rewild the spirit. A podcast by Caroline Kirjean. Je me souviens. I remember. Have you ever viewed one of those YouTube videos called ambience videos? There are all kinds, of course. There are the very popular nature sounds. Those are the forest, the sea, the lakeside cabin. I recently discovered my favorite ones, ambience videos that recreate a specific historical setting. A scriptorium in a medieval monastery, the interior of an Iroquois longhouse, an Edwardian-era parlor set for tea, a 1920s writer's den. These videos are often quite impressive in their high degree of historical accuracy and in the attendant sound effects, church bells pealing, farm animals crying, people laughing and chatting, that they recreate to make you feel like you're right there. Like you've time traveled to a faraway land. Strangely enough, they also make you feel like you're right at home. Why does this virtual reality appeal to us so much? I think it has something to do with our desire to experience the past as a distant home. As something which is mysterious and yet very familiar, something which ultimately allows us to touch the eternal within our souls. It's a desire we all share, some more than others. For me, this need to immerse myself in the experience of timelessness is very strong. It is, I would venture to say, a spiritual need, one which informs most everything I do, from art to writing to podcasting. It's a need which will shape every episode of this podcast, inviting you to share and participate in a timeless ambience poem, one which seeks to envelop you in a contemplative and creative mood. My aim is to capture a moment, to try and capture something of the essence of a moment in time as if it were a fine perfume that I wanted to bottle and offer as a gift from me to you. I truly believe that in the midst of the current upheaval in the world, it's a gift which is precious and vital. So I invite you to make yourself a nice cup of tea and accompany me on this gentle and meditative journey of discovery. For context, I will start by telling you that I was born and live in Quebec, Canada. The motto of this province is Je me souviens, which means I remember. I've long been fascinated by these words. They were actually taken from a short poem by the late 19th century French-Canadian illustrator and architect Eugène-Étienne Taché. He wrote, Je me souviens que né sous le lys, je crois sous la rose. I remember being born under the lily and growing up under the rose, meaning that Quebec was founded by France, but grew up under English rule. One reason for my fascination with this provincial motto is that in reality, Quebecers don't seem to do much remembering at all. Why don't Quebecers like to recall their past? Is it because of its relative darkness, the oppression suffered at the hands of so many? Yes, of course it is. But it is also something else, an expression of our modern society's denial of history. This denial, I find, is a common trait of most Western societies. What's difficult is that I myself feel a rather deep connection to the past, and so this propensity to deny and even erase it stands in stark contrast to my own way of seeing things. I would even go so far as to say that this contradiction makes me suffer on a very personal level, and in 1,000 different ways. Like when I notice that a potential friend shows no interest in the historical references in my artwork, or when I feel that my artistic sensibility is ignored or even derided. To my mind, all this harks back to the cartesian, rational mindset which informs every aspect of our Western way of life, even to the extent of embracing technology and forgetting history altogether. As if the life of the mind could be reduced to a numbers game. And yet that is what we all believe, even if only unconsciously. This is also one of the reasons I have launched this podcast, to try to investigate and understand both our denial and our yearning for connection to the past and to our history. My own personal history cannot be understood without reference to my native Quebec City. I feel that one of the best descriptions I have ever read of this place can be found not in Quebec literature, but in the American author Willa Cather's 1931 novel, Shadows on the Rock. Auclair, she writes, thought this rock-set town like nothing so much as one of those little artificial mountains which were made in the churches at home to present a theatric scene of the Nativity. Divest your mind of oriental color, and you saw here very much such a mountain rock, cunningly built over with churches, convents, fortifications, gardens, following the natural irregularities of the headland on which they stood. Willa Cather describes a very evocative scene where the town apothecary, Euclide Auclair, is gazing out over the St. Lawrence River in the golden light of autumn, gazing long and hard until the last French ship slips over the horizon and disappears. He stands for a long time looking over the river, then turns and walks back home. The small French colony would have no earthly connection to the motherland for the rest of the year. These first settlers must have felt extreme desolation and loneliness at the thought of such separation. The sense of disconnect, of utter isolation they must have felt through the long, harsh winter months while fearing famine and disease is quite humbling. My own idea of the first woman in Quebec is not the Virgin Mary, nor even one of the famous filles du roi, daughters of the king, but of my paternal grandmother, Lucille. She had been born around 1915 in a remote fishing village on the North Shore, and had traveled to the big city, Quebec, while still quite young. She came here to work as a servant for the wealthy people living in La Haute Ville, a section of town which was perched on the very same cliff Willa Cather so accurately describes. My grandmother washed clothes, prepared meals, cared for and fed her employer's children, cleaned and scoured the house from top to bottom. This endless round of chores went on from sunrise to sunset, except on Sundays, when she was granted half a day of rest. I often wonder how she bore her burden, how she felt about her life, what she dreamed of. I wonder what kind of small, contemplative space she managed to carve out for herself. My grandmother slept in an attic room, what they call une chambre de bonne, which means servants' quarters. I tried to imagine what it might have been like. Try to imagine it with me. Small room, a red braided rug beside the bed, a night table painted white with a lamp on it. Would it have been a kerosene lamp at the time? A few frames on the wall, and pinned over the bed, one or two black and white photos she would have brought with her in her suitcase. A photo of her parents, one of her older sister maybe? A rosary made of wooden beads hanging on the bedpost. Imagine this small room being your only private space. In the early days, from the attic window of this fancy townhouse located on the prestigious Grande Allée, my grandmother would have gazed down toward the distant St. Lawrence, not in despair at any disappearing French ships, but in despair at her isolation and loneliness in the midst of a bustling town. How many nights did she spend lying in her attic room, thinking about the family and friends she left behind? How often did she lie thinking about her prospects, about the mysterious future that awaited her? What light guided her? What shadows haunted her? I do not know, though she once told me something which made me shiver. There were such large gaps in the attic's roof, she explained, that in winter her bed was often dusted with snow. Why must we learn to nurture a past that, for so many of those who came before us, would appear to have been so harsh, so forbidding? Well, for one thing, because our ancestors, in an important sense, lived for us. Because through the emotional and physical legacy they left behind, they are us, no matter how far removed the realities of their lives seems to be from our own. As Mark Twain quipped, the past is never dead, it's not even past. In our technology-driven, consumerist societies, we have trouble understanding and heeding this truth. It's important to recognize that remembering the past in an authentic way is not an exercise in what we call positive psychology. Authentically remembering our history does not mean romanticizing or whitewashing it away. It must be recalled and understood for what it was, but also for what it stands for, and for the future it dreamed up, and which belongs to us now in all its rich possibilities. It must be remembered for its light and shadow, the same light and shadow which belong to our living times, our own emotional and spiritual lives. Do you cherish the memory of a lost relative? Someone who, through their work, or just through their way of being, shed light on the times they lived in? Take the time to conjure up this memory. Take a moment to pause in your busy day and recall one or two telling details, one or two specific memories about that person. What do such details say about their character, their strengths, their weaknesses? What do they say about the past? Finally, I would ask you to take a moment to reflect on what the memory of such personal details says about yourself. Are they memories you had chosen to forget or bring to the fore? Recall that in many traditional cultures, the act of remembering and revering ancestors is woven, like a tapestry, into the fabric of daily life. The Native Americans, for instance, strongly believed in honoring their elders and the ancestors who came before them. Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, and many religious communities across the world also honor their dead during All Souls' Day. We should learn the wisdom of such ways and devote a few moments every day to this important, deeply spiritual practice. Before you go about your day, take a deep breath and try to untangle the feelings these memories elicit, and to imagine how they might consciously impact you going forward. One way to do so is by finding a quiet space and lighting a candle to that memory. A dancing flame will make your loved one's spirit come alive. I'd like to share with you a recipe for votive teacup candles, which is in fact an exercise in meditation and mindfulness. One incredibly vivid memory I have of my grandmother, of Grand-Mama as I called her, is of sitting in her kitchen in the afternoon and having tea and cake, usually one of her homemade pineapple upside-down cakes with thick cream poured all over. We just used to talk and laugh and share all sorts of stories, and these moments stand out as very special ones for me. I guess because I felt loved and protected and needed. The cups my grandmother had were old, vintage ones, made of Limoges porcelain. She was so proud of them. So when I discovered the idea of teacup candles, it seemed a perfect way to conjure up and honor her memory. I know she would have loved them. You can find images of teacup candles most anywhere online, actually, and on Pinterest in particular. In case you don't know what they are, they're simply assorted vintage teacups, the kind all grandmothers seem to have, with wax and a wick melted into them so as to create a candle. They're amazingly beautiful and elegant, and for me, very, very evocative. To create a votive teacup candle, just go to your local antique store. That is, if you still have one, but that's an entirely different topic for another day. And buy a few vintage teacups, preferably with beautiful designs on them. Something that inspires you, something pretty and delicate. If the person you are honoring is a man, you can opt for a more neutral piece, or even a decorative mug, something elegant but a little more masculine. Buy wax. I recommend soy wax, the reason being that it burns without smoking, but you could also use paraffin or beeswax, which is of course natural. You'll also need wax wicks. And what you do is suspend the wick over the teacup using a pair of wooden skewers to keep it straight and steady. Then you melt down the wax in a double boiler over medium-high heat. Once the wax is completely melted, you can remove from the heat and cool for a couple of minutes. Then you pour the melted wax into the teacup or the mug. Then let the mixture harden for about 6 hours. Finally, cut down the wick to about 1 inch high, and you've created an original teacup candle. They're so beautiful and such an amazing arts and crafts project. but they can also hold a very special meaning for you, like they do for me. They're a little tribute to your personal history. You can arrange your votive teacup candle in a little space, such as one on a mantle or a vanity, and place the photo of your loved one nearby if you have one. Such a space can become a sacred one for you and your family. The little blue and pink cup I chose to honor Grandmama stands as a reminder of the small bit of luxury she allowed herself. But it is also a symbol of her personal elegance and beauty. The teacup, after all, appears in many great artworks as a symbol of femininity. Thus, the space we've created for our memorial is sacred, but also artistic and meaningful. When I stand before it, I always pause to think on that small detail she revealed to me so long ago. I think of the dusting of snow on her attic bed, and I begin to understand the breadth of her struggles, her successes. I begin to take full measure of her sorrow, her happiness. I begin to comprehend the grand arc of her life and of my own. And I feel suddenly nurtured and loved in a way only she knew how to nurture and love, as if she once again held me close. Join me next week as we continue on our journey through the mysteries of the past and their rich legacy. Join me as I share and experience with you the vintage comfort of another tea house poem.